Yeah. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Tracy Show. And as soon as I get my camera situated, we'll get started. As you can see, I have two guests here because this is the second part of our presidential roundtable. I have two guests. I will let them introduce themselves. But first, I want to go pay some bills and then kind of go over the rules of tonight's discussion. So, first, please subscribe. Subscribe, 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 subscribe. I can't say that enough. Subscribe. We are at 220. So now we're 80 away from 300. So I'm going to keep pressing subscribe, 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 subscribe. Definitely do that. Support me on Patreon. Support starts at $2 a month. Um, and that gives you access to special programs and recordings. Um, Follow me or follow this show on Twitter. You can also see this show on my website, TRACYMediaLLC.com. It is running live there right now, as usual. And we got a person come in early, wants to say hello. That is Bark Test. I think that's how you pronounce it. If I'm pronouncing it wrong, please forgive me. So, the rules of engagement are this: each person will have 3 minutes to answer the particular questions I'm going to answer. If another person wants to ask or clarify something that the other has said, I would ask that they ask me permission first, and then we'll go from there. Um, Depending on well, I'll get to that portion later. So this will mean if I wave my hands, you'll have 1 minute left. And this, I don't know why this camera, this means you're finished. So I'm going to be watching my clock, which is on my phone, and watching the screen too, just to hear, just to make sure I'm keeping track of things. So, I don't know who's going to go first. So I'm going to let Dave go first because he was here first. So I will set the question up, same question to both. Um, well, here's a question. One of our viewers asked it. America has over 300 million people. How come they chose the two oldest people to run for office? And so, Dave, well, no, not yet. I will let you start.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, Tracy, and thank you very much for doing what you're doing and trying to help the voting public be as educated and informed as possible. I'm Dave Gardner. I'm an independent candidate for President of the United States, and there's a pretty good chance that you might not have even heard of me at this stage of the game. And that's another part of the problem, besides having two very elderly gentlemen running for office. We have we're stuck in this two-party system, and it's really hard for alternate voices to get any attention. This is a really unique election. A lot of people are very afraid that we might get a repeat engagement with Donald Trump. And, there are certainly some people who want that, but most Americans do not want that, and they're scared to death of that. And so the Democratic Party, I think, is reacting by not wanting to take any chances and going with what they think is the safest candidate. Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump last time around and has had a pretty decent run so far in his administration. Not perfect, but not bad. He's got a lot of experience in politics, a lot of friends in politics. He really wants to work across the aisle, so he has a lot going for him. And you know what? I may well even find myself voting for Joe Biden just to be sure that we don't end up with a criminal, an arrogant, ignorant, criminal real estate developer in the White House. And I'm saying that because those are just the facts. Tracy, I wasn't even watching for you. I didn't get the 1 minute mark yet.
Nope, you're
Okay,
still good.
great.
Go. Keep
Okay,
going. You
okay,
got a minute left.
okay. Well, since age is the subject of this question, I will address my age. I am considerably younger than those two gentlemen, but I'm not, as young as a lot of the people who I hope are really engaged watching this and voting in this election. I think it's time for people, even in my age group, to start handing things over to the younger generation. So if I'm elected, you'll find my vice president, you'll find my cabinet, a lot of my advisors will be considerably younger. And if I am not elected, I'm not running again in 4 years because I think I will be too old at that time. We need some good, fresh minds running our country.
You are now got your time. So Frank, you are up, or is it Frankie? I always do that. Is it Frankie? Do you prefer Frankie or Frank?
It doesn't matter. Legally, it's Frank. Frankie is what I use to sound younger and, to appeal to my younger folks.
And darn,
Well,
he is younger.
I would actually be the youngest ever elected. I'm running on the Democratic line. My name is Frankie Losada. I am the first ever Puerto Rican to ever run for president of the United States in history, which is great. Only the fifth Latino in general. Um, yeah, I actually did just scored. We had the Illinois primary. I was one of the few candidates to actually make the ballot on that one because a lot of the ballots are pay to play. And if you don't have a good funding or backing, it's tough. But we were out there braving the cold in Illinois. We made on the ballot and we actually secured 2% of the votes. It was just over 14,000 votes in the Illinois primary, which was phenomenal because if y'all don't know, people if in Chicago and Illinois are very, very civically motivated and very active. They take their vote seriously. So the fact that 14,000 plus entrusted me with their vote is a big, big deal. I'm also in history the only person to beat Joe Biden with 100% of the votes in any county in the United States. So thank you for the one voter in Loving County who went out and voted and decided to not vote for any other elected position except for the president and picked me as their candidate. Um, but yeah, so it's been a journey. Obviously, on the Democratic side, Joe Biden has secured the nomination. So we're facing that. But you know what? The DNC is in August, and I will not take anything at face value until the DNC is over.
wow, you both stay right under time. Thank you. Okay, so here comes the first legitimate. Well, not that that question wasn't legitimate because I was definitely going to ask that. So we know that we keep hearing constant messages about the economy is doing so well. And that message, in my opinion, is just a false one. Um, as a person that struggles and lives from paycheck to paycheck, I'm one of the 61% of Americans that does that. Grocery prices are higher.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the housing crisis is out of hand with rents and mortgages being higher than they've ever been. What, and this will be to Frank first and then Dave second, what would you do on day one to address the economic situation that's going on in our country?
Well, I am a huge proponent of universal basic income. So obviously, I believe if we are able to all these years give money to the rich, we should be able to tax them at a reasonable rate, in which would stimulate the economy and allow us to make universal basic income, feasible. Universal basic income from the outside glance sounds like a wild perspective, but everybody above the age of 18 would receive a stipend of $1,000 per month, which means that every single person starts off that entire year with a base of $12,000 a year, which would obviously supplement and help out a lot of individuals. It'll also counter a lot of our social programs that are not working, like our broken welfare system, our Section 8 program, where we're mad at the individuals accepting the low Section 8 prices, but not mad at the real estate owners who are capitalizing on all of the loopholes, making so much money off of those programs. We're talking billions as opposed to the couple thousand that these individuals are making on those programs. That's a big way, one, to put more money into people's pockets. As you know, and once we have more money, we spend more money, that boosts the economy moving forward. Also the transition between fuel prices. I'm a proponent of nuclear energy. So if we move that movement forward, That would reduce our costs and our dependency on fossil fuels, in which we can use those just like other foreign nations are doing to make that our main export, which would make us super, super more profitable. And we'd be able to incorporate that, lower our own cost, personal cost, and improve the quality of life here in America.
And you also ended up under a minute.
Under a minute, I had a whole minute. Oh,
Yeah, you had a whole another 125 to go. But since I stopped you, Dave, you may start.
You know, we hear the pundits talk a lot about the economy, how well it's doing, that the stock market is soaring and GDP growth is better than expected. And yet, Tracy, a lot of voters feel like they don't feel like life is going well. And the reason for that is there's really a disconnect. You know, you don't need GDP growth to put food on the table or to have transportation, to have a roof over your head. Robust GDP growth doesn't do that for you. Robust GDP growth doesn't cure cancer. It doesn't give your kids a bright future. It is a false metric. And a lot of the things that are wrong with our nation and our world today are the result of chasing GDP growth, this false god of economic growth. What is it what do you care about? What do you want? Well, you want food on the table. You want transportation. You want a roof over your head. You want a job. But you know what? You want more than any of those things even? You want a bright future for your kids. You would sacrifice any of those things for yourself if that's what it took to give your kids a bright future. And you'll hear me tonight say a few things that are a little bit contrary to what Frankie talks about, because I'm running because I see that we are in ecological overshoot. We have outgrown the planet. And so the system doesn't work like it used to work. We can't just grow the economy and keep on making the pizza bigger so that as we add more people to the planet, everybody still gets a slice of the pizza. We've got 8 billion people and a $100 trillion economy. It's too much. The planet can't handle it. So it's not delivering for people like you, Tracy, and it can't. And it's delivering for the very rich. And because the rich are insisting on taking ever bigger slices of that pizza, that's leaving smaller and smaller slices of pizza for the rest of it. So I hope during the course of the evening I'll have a chance to talk a lot more about the things that I'll be doing to make sure that everybody's needs are met, but that we're doing it within the means that we have, without killing the planet. You know, we don't want to leave a dead planet for our kids. We want to give them a bright future.
Thank you very much. So, sticking with the economy, as I mentioned, under the Biden administration, homelessness has increased by 12%. And the majority of veterans are the ones that make up that homeless population. Again, rents are skyrocketing. I know here in Indianapolis, it costs for a one-bedroom apartment. The one that I found was $1,500 a month. Plus, the person was expected to pay for utilities. We've been told that there's nothing we can do about it. That's just the market, that it is what it is. But of course, that's causing homelessness. Mortgages. If you are like me and you bought a house, my mortgage interest rate is 7.5%, which makes my payment much higher than it normally would be when that rate was lower. So I'm praying that rate will at least come down. It has come down a little bit, but it needs to be in that 3 to 4%, just so it can be affordable. But what would you tell? What specific? And I'll let Dave go first on this one. What specific thing would you do to address the homelessness issue in the United States?
The homelessness issue is complicated and very challenging. So I don't think I'm going to give you a complete answer, but let me give you an answer that will address what I think are the major factors here. One, you mentioned vets. We have we are suffering from the outcome of mistreating our veterans for a long, long time. We have got to take better care of our veterans. We've got to honor our veterans and stop being so cheap when it comes to meeting their healthcare needs and their needs of reassimilating into society when they leave the military. I think that will address some of the veteran population that you see homeless on the streets. Another really big one, of course, is mental health, and dealing with the mental health crisis will help address not just homelessness, but also the mass violence that we're experiencing today in our country. We have got to, mental health will be a priority in my administration. I don't have a tight plan yet, but we will make sure that first responders that include mental health experts instead of so people are getting mental health care instead of being shot or arrested when they have issues, and in dealing with in people who are in encampments among the homeless, rather than just moving them out of sight, we'll be doing everything we can to get them the mental health care that they need so that they can just survive in our society. And then the last major factor, I think, in the homelessness issue is, of course, the cost of housing. And the cost of housing, it really is the marketplace at work here. It is supply and demand. And we've been growing our population here in the U.S. About 1% a year and not building houses as fast. And as long as you have more people in the country and fewer houses, the cost of housing is going to be high. My administration is going to have a population policy because we're going to be getting back within the means of our planet and getting out of ecological overshoots. So we're going to put an end to economic growth, and we're going to be accountable for the size of our population, and we're going to encourage and support young people choosing smaller families, and our population is going to begin to contract right away. And you will see, it won't take long, and that's going to trickle into the marketplace and affect the cost of housing. And it won't be long before there'll be more houses than there will be demand for the houses, and the prices will come back down.
Thank you very, very much. Okay, Frankie, you may go, please.
So, as I mentioned before, universal basic income would directly impact, one, those veterans, two, the homeless folks, because with $12,000 a year under their belt guaranteed, that should be able to be enough to at least get them some sort of housing on their own. Now, for the homeless population, I'll be honest, the biggest threat to them and what keeps them there is housed individuals like us. The ones that trip over or that step over them and treat them like crap, ignore them, don't want to give them the resources, and don't want to acknowledge them as a human being. That's the reason why they build into that dependency on substance abuse, and they develop those mental health issues. So we have to take a much more humanistic approach towards our homeless folks. Nobody wants to be there. It's not a desirable position. My policy removes them in that scenario from those other exterior factors that do contribute to those circumstances. So, for example, my Home Act would create tiny home communities, which are equipped with specialists who will be able to track case management, give them an own little individual properties to live in during that time and transition process, give them the mental health resources, the substance abuse resources they need until they can get on their feet, and then reintroduce them back into society in a much better scenario that they were once. Because our public shelters are terrible. They're ridden with crime. Most of them have time restrictions, so you're getting kicked out in the morning time anyway to fend for yourself throughout the entire day. So it is a broken system. We need to acknowledge it. Now, veterans, under no circumstances should anybody who has fought for this country ever be homeless. They should be treated better than any of the celebrities that we look up to here. They are the reasons why we are able to live in this country as freely as we are. So that I have an entire other plan to re-establish the VA, take it down, and kind of reconstructed in a manner that does benefit them and gives them those references. Oh, so
Nope,
that's
keep
me,
going.
right? Got
1 minute.
But affordable housing is a step in the direction. Now, to be honest, it for me it'd be a lot easier to implement universal basic income than to get the amount of affordable housing we need. And I don't want to hear that we cannot fix the problem, because they estimated the entire cost to fix homelessness in this country is $20 billion, when we just sent 114, so almost 5 times that amount over to foreign wars. So if we really, really wanted to prioritize, all we had to do was reallocate those resources.
Thank you very much. And to the audience that's patiently waiting, I promise I will get to the questions if I can. If I cannot, I will copy them and send them to the participants. So if you want to, and I'll have them to give their contact information at the end. And if you want to follow up with a question that I don't get to, please do. My next question, we're still on the economy, but it's a little bit different. So, a complaint that I have been hearing a lot is that the United States has sent, as we know, billions of dollars to both Israel and Ukraine for their war efforts. Those are two, but there are several more things that the U.S. is spending their money on in terms of the military. And a complaint that I hear, which I would love to know your thoughts about it, is, is this a real complaint or is this a fake complaint? The question would be, how would you address spending money overseas? Would that be a priority, or would you be more of a, an America first type? And I'm going to set my clock because it stopped. And Frankie, you may go with that question if you would like to. Go ahead, please.
So, my priority is the American people, hands down. It is who run this country, the ones who are supposed to be in control of this country, and so my dedication is to be a representative of them. And they, the American people, have spoken that said we don't want any more foreign wars. We should be looking for diplomatic approaches and peace resolutions rather than using all this money. But you know what? It's not an unknown thing that there's tons of businesses that profit off of foreign wars. It's the military industrial complex. It's something that we are now aware of, and nobody's even trying to hide it. I would not have sent over all of that money, because if we continue to fund one side of the war, then we're just propelling oh my gosh, I cannot speak today. We're only propelling the aggression and the problem even further going forward. And so in my administration, no, we prioritize the American people. We sit there and try to see how we can fix here, how we can make it so that we can actually honestly say that we are the greatest country on earth and fully believe it, where every single person is not watching their TV, watching our politicians telling us how well our life is going while we're sitting at home saying, who is he talking to? Because that's what's happening now. And to know that the problem with our sending over money to these foreign wars is that we don't have that money to begin with. We're constantly printing that money that is just fiat money, which is not any which way of how to run a country. In fact, the president of El Salvador was here doing a speech, and he was laughing in front of all the conservatives about how we spend our money, how we print our money, and how our money actually has no basis, which if you look at how all the other foreign entities and economies in the world are doing, they're making these pacts that do not include the United States, which are further. Okay, that's 1 minute. Gotcha. So, like institutions like BRICS is taking their foreign economies and putting them together and building these powerhouses, which are no longer going to utilize the necessity of American trade and will eventually phase out the American dollar, which means that all of our printing that we're doing now is even just going to further inflation even faster because the dollar has lost its value and its worth.
Thank you very much. Dave, you may follow up.
Thanks. It will be a priority to me to see that the United States is a really good global citizen. And in some ways, we have been an exemplary citizen. in much of our history, but in other ways we have not. And so there'll be some differentiation here. We will not be fighting resource wars, but we will come to the aid of good people when they are under attack. In the case of Ukraine, I would want to talk to military experts before I pulled the trigger. But I would offer robust defense for Ukraine. I would step it up for the Ukrainians because they deserve to have help in defending against an aggressor. But your question indicated there was some concern about resources. All of that
Correct.
money, being spent on war and being spent outside the United States. One of the big goals of my administration is going to be to shrink the footprint of the federal government. And the military there's a lot of waste in federal government, a lot of waste in military, and of course our military is a huge factor when it comes to carbon emissions. So we're going to be really streamlining the military. We're going to still be strong, but we're going to be smart, and we're not going to be wasteful. And that's going to leave a lot of resources on the table that today are being wasted by the United States in archaic military style engagement and operations. And those resources will be reallocated to the citizens in our communities. And we're going to provide a lot of support to the people in our communities because we're all going to be getting really busy at the community level inventing a healthy 21st century economy, figuring out how we can all have our needs met without killing the planet. We've got to shrink our footprint. We've got to be smarter, and it's going to take some resources. And so the federal government's going to provide a lot of support and help for that. Let's see. Well, I hate to finish early, but I think I've answered the question.
Well, there's a follow-up question here in the comment section, and I want to give you both 3 minutes additional to answer this concern, and I'll let Dave, you go first, and I'm going to read the whole thing, and then I'll let you know when you can proceed. So the comment states that, sure, America is important, but Russia cannot be allowed to win this war. That would put Europe and maybe the whole world at risk. Cutting help to Ukraine would be cutting off their foot and expecting them to fight without any problems. So I said, Dave, I was going to let you answer that follow-up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I would not cut aid to Ukraine. I really believe that if we had not been so timid in our initial response, that war would probably be over by now. But everybody's been so afraid to tick off Russia that the aid to Ukraine has been too much of a trickle, and that's made the war last longer than it needs to last. I think it needs to be really clear around the world that the United States, along with some of our other good fellow global citizens, that we will stand up for human rights wherever they are under attack in the world. But that doesn't mean we're going to be, spending all the money and burning all the fossil fuels on military operations the way we are today. We're going to get a lot smarter, bring a lot of troops home, but be ready to engage when someone needs our help.
Okay, you had a whole 2 minutes left, but that's okay. Frankie, you may proceed.
So, in regards to Ukraine, now we're already invested into it, and whoever made that comment is correct. Losing Ukraine to Russia would be a geographical issue for all of us, especially Europe. It gives them access to attack a whole variety of other countries that are surrounding. Now, we are limited under the restrictions of NATO, which is why we cannot physically enter into the war, because that would be catastrophic as well. And I don't put it past Mr. Putin to be the first one to utilize nuclear weaponry, which is something that I'm trying to avoid 100%, because the problem with that is we have these nuclear weapons that have tons of that nuclear power into it that we have no idea what it actually does, because every time we test it in small doses, the results are devastating and catastrophic. So the fact that we power punch all of this potential into these weapons is concerning, because it could really, really impact, obviously, all of Europe and the United States and humanity as a whole. So, which is another reason why we should be promoting peace and diplomacy rather than war. Now, because we're already embedded into the Ukraine war, yes, we should have been very proactive prior, to brokering that peace. We knew that there was going to be attacks. In fact, before Putin changed the constitution in Russia, he wasn't eligible for re-election, which I didn't know a president could change the constitution, but apparently Russia has their own set of rules. In the constitution, the only way he could have run for re-election would have been to absorb a new landmass or a new territory. So Ukraine was always on the spectrum of attack. And if you understand Putin and his reasoning for trying to reunite at least the region that used to be the USSR, you would see, I think we mentioned it last time, Tracy, that Putin actually, he's got like a built-in traumatic vendetta over the West Germany knocking down the wall. Um, he was actually in charge of that operation, and he wanted to fire upon the innocent people, and the guards there refused. They said, "No, sir, we're going to wait for Russia to respond." And Russia left him hanging, and for that reason, they had to knock down the wall, and they moved forward and ended up in unified Germany. Ever since then, he returned to Russia, rebuilt his reputation now as the new leader, but he's always had that vendetta and anger towards that situation. So he has a point to prove. And we need to be able to sit there and take a sterner, more stricter approach and say, listen, this is not your show to run. We are a global entity, and we will, fight till ends meet. And even his own allies are turning his back on him because they see that his intentions are not for the good of anyone else but himself.
You had 7 seconds to spare. So, and I'm not even going to time this. I'll just yes or no questions because you both answered Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
but I think I brought up Israel also.
Yep.
Um, and other wars that America is bombing Yemen. I believe there's bombing in Syria. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's bombing in Syria that the United States is doing. There's drone strikes taking place in the Congo that the United States has involvement in. I didn't hear anything about those. And it could be the way I phrased the question, but what about those efforts? Either one doesn't matter.
So, only because your question specifically revolved around Ukraine. We've had this discussion before. I am not in support of funding the Israeli war against the Palestinians. I am sorry, but when I see where our dollar amounts are going, I cannot approve that military strategy. I am not in favor of it, and I do not want to be complicit in any of those actions. And I'm glad that you mentioned Congo, Syria, and Sudan. Now, granted, Yemen at the current moment, we've always had some kind of heightened tensions with them. Now it's increased more because we're turning Israeli ships around over there, and that's disrupting their money. And now when you start playing with their money, we have to jump in and play, which is something that I had said from the onset of this conflict, was that all it's going to do is infuriate other nations in that region, thus eventually bringing the American people into war. And I'm not willing to put my soldiers' lives at risk. As I said, I love my veterans. I would like to avoid as many innocent American civilians as we can have. And by implementing and supporting this kind of movement, and granted, now the government is starting to change its tone on that approach and change their direction, which is about time. But as you see, we're going forward. And the short answer to your question too is it's the color, man. If you're not a generally accepted white nation, we're not talking about Congo. We're not going to talk about Sudan. We're not going to talk about any of those other nations that have fallen victim to the United States. Oh my gosh, military
intervention. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what same thing is. If you look at the history of where our intervention has gone, specifically in Central and South America, where we destabilized those economies, we destabilized so many other economies across the world that we don't talk about, which is no reason or no surprise why so many countries have this hatred towards us. We don't learn about that in school, but if you start digging deeper, you start realizing, oh, wow, we did that. Like Haiti. Haiti was one of the most prosperous countries outside of the French colonies. And then once they fought for their freedom from France, once they fought for their freedom from France, we went in there and basically just pillaged everything. And now look at them.
Yep. Dave, please.
Frankie, that was a really good answer. You kind of brought up some things that I really would like to talk about a little bit more, and that is, why do the people who hate the United States hate the United States? I think colonialism on the part of the United States has gotten us into this mess that we're in, where we see so many threats, and I think we have to be careful to try to minimize those threats and be ready to defend against those threats, but we've got to do it in some new ways. We can't do it by having troops on the ground in much of the world. We have the technology today to keep a better eye on what our enemies are doing, and we probably need to keep that eye on them, because I don't know how long it's going to take before they finally trust us again. It probably would be generations, because of the long history that the United States has had of plundering the resources of the world. Well, we're going to stop doing that. We're on a full planet, and nobody gets to go take the resources away from somebody else. We all need to be able to live within the biocapacity of our nation. And so over time, those threats, I hope, will diminish as we become a better global citizen. Israel is a really tough one to talk about, but you want us to talk about it. And so what I'll say is that everyone has some blame in the mess in Gaza and Israel. I do not think the United States can or should support what Israel is doing today. Maybe there's something I don't know. I would certainly want to talk to some really smart advisors before I make any changes in U.S. policy there. But my sense is that what Israel's doing is inexcusable, unjustifiable, and even if it was justifiable, they're just making enemies that will last generations, and it's just foolish. But we've got to find a way to have a two-state solution over there. We can't have Israel wiped off the face of the earth any more than we can allow Israel to wipe Palestinians off of that part of the planet.
So, and everyone in the comments, I literally see your questions. I promise I see them, but I got to get to another issue that's very, very, very close to my heart, and that's our healthcare system. The only word I can use to describe our healthcare system is garbage. That's the nicest word that I could possibly come up with. Many Americans, when they go to a hospital, an emergency, a planned surgery, the costs are getting higher and higher, and insurance companies are covering less and less and less. And while I've made it a proponent that I'm a proponent of single payer healthcare, I realize everyone else may not be. And I always say when you're president, but in this case, because there's two of you, I have to say if you are president. If you are president, what specific, and I mean specific, step would you take to correct the fact that millions of Americans have filed bankruptcy because of medical debt? 32 to 33 million Americans don't even have health insurance. The Affordable Care Act premiums are unaffordable. And Joe Biden, for some unknown reason, threw 15 million people off of Medicaid because apparently COVID is over, but somebody should have told the new people that were catching COVID that, but that's okay. So I'm going to let Frank answer the question first. You have, this time I'm going to bump it up to 4, because I think this is a little bit more detailed in terms of what it is you want to do to solve what I think is one of the most, it's not been talked about this election cycle, and I wish it would be. But you can go ahead and proceed when you're ready.
Oh, first and foremost, my healthcare plan is a guaranteed healthcare plan. So it is called generational health. And what it means is basically that at any point in your life, from womb to tomb, you have coverage, not just in times of dire necessity, but at any given time, focusing on education, educating our communities on one, preventative care specifically. Because what happens with our cost here in America is we're only going to the doctors when we feel sick. And at that time, our conditions are only worse and sometimes irreversible. And so that's where we have to start educating our community, saying, hey, it's okay to start getting your checkups. Let's do it every year. And let's give you access to that in an affordable way. Now, the biggest thing that I fear or that I come in contact with is everybody asking me who's going to pay for it, how is it going to happen? And the short answer is it's not that hard to do. The problem, the reason why there's a disconnect is because we're considering American prices in that logic, not realizing that the same medical treatment, medications, and procedures are all at a fraction of the cost globally everywhere else. And they're still making profits on it. For example, I don't know how much American x-rays were to cost, but they're at least $150, $200 plus, depending on the x-rays you need. I was able to take my buddy in Mexico when we were down in El Paso. We needed x-rays for tuberculosis, tuberculosis. $15, CD in hand, in and out, 15 minutes. And they're making a profit off of that too. Same x-rays, same quality. What's with the price differences? So one of my plans talks about removing the restrictions and borders on tested medications, because we have pharmaceutical companies here that are selling the same exact medications here at a fraction of the cost in Europe, in Southeast Asia, and everywhere else in the world. Same exact medications treating the same medical ailments. Right there, that'll reduce the cost of medications significantly across the board, which would then make it accessible for us. Along with our taxing the rich and my universal basic income, now that supplements the cost of Americans being able to sacrifice or not have to sacrifice as much to afford any kind of that treatment. The other thing I incorporated is within my immigration plan, because the big things when you hear talk about the equivalent would be social or universal healthcare, they always talk about wait times and lack of resources and doctors, which is, valid argument. We have a huge population in this country. So I counter that by allowing and opening and expanding our visa programs for medical professionals who are licensed in other countries for a multitude of reasons. One, to bring in that influx of medical professionals to counter that wait time and the needs for the American people, but also, two, because my plan expands past that and expands into alternative medicine so that we're not sitting there drugging all of and putting chemicals into all of the people here in this country, and for holistic and more natural approaches, which are very prevalent in other nations. So when we're bringing in those individuals who are licensed professionals from their own agencies, from their own countries, now we're expanding into that intellect and bringing it into our own healthcare structure.
Thank you. Dave, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Well, let me start before I forget with, I want to take exception to one thing Frankie said, and that is bringing medical professionals in from other countries. I think part of being a good global citizen is not being selfish. And I don't think that we should be poaching the best and the brightest from other nations. Those countries need good medical professionals too, as much as we do, maybe more in a lot of cases. So my solutions would not be kind of an expansionist kind of an approach like that. I think solving this healthcare thing, there's a lot of parts that have problems with them, and so I think I don't have a plan today. I think what I would do is engage a council over the long term to figure out how we're going to solve this, because we know we have to get profit out of it, but we have to find a way to have research still be very robust. Can we find a way so that the National Institutes of Health can be our strength of research, and that we don't have to depend on big pharma to do the heavy lifting in the research department? It's tricky. It's tricky. We'd have to emphasize well care and not just treating the symptoms. We have to find a way to incentivize our residents of this country to take better care of themselves. We've got a problem with really poor health and poor health habits, poor nutrition. Some of that is because of cost, but some of that is just because of lack of education or lack of interest. And so if we want to have a really efficient, well-functioning healthcare system, we've got to find a way to improve the health of all of our residents here in the United States. I've witnessed red tape and bureaucracy. We've almost gotten rid of paper from the healthcare business, which was great. Paper was just, we were dying in paper, and yet I really believe, I don't have the stats, but this is just my observation, that probably our healthcare costs today, more than a third of them are just all the people who are typing up, reports and sending them into insurance companies. It's the paperwork. It's not the healthcare. So we've got to find ways to eliminate a lot of that bureaucracy and red tape. We've got to eliminate abuse of the system. We've got to find ways to where emergency care is really being used for emergency care, not for doctor visits. So that's kind of my checklist, and it's tricky. I did a lot of work as a filmmaker before I decided to become a full-time activist, and a lot of my clients were in the healthcare field. And so I've spent a lot of time talking to medical experts and spending time in healthcare delivery areas and the leading hospitals of our country, and I've seen just the crazy waste of all the bureaucracy and the red tape. And my hope would be that we could allocate those resources better. But I don't think we can do it overnight. And lastly, Tracy, because I gave up, my lucrative filmmaking business almost 20 years ago in order to work on saving the planet, I have had to depend on the Affordable Care Act for my medical insurance, and I haven't found that to be unaffordable. I have found that to be a real tremendous help, and I think we do need to believe that we need to ante up. Somebody else isn't going to pay for all of our health care.
I think I was reading a study to follow up where you said your costs are drugs. The average cost overall is upwards to $400 a month, and it depends on the packages because they have like the basic, the middle one, and then the high one. So it depends on which one you get and all those type of factors. But again, that's just a study I had from years ago. I may not be active, but from my understanding, it's definitely higher. So the next issue I want to talk about is another one that, and this one I'm specifically asking as a Black American. I'm specifically, it's specific. It makes sense to me. It may not make sense to you. So there has been a move by Black activists in this country to have financial reparations for the descendants of African slaves in this country. There's been a so-called study commission for at least 20 years, and it hasn't gone anywhere. Do you, and I'm just going to, this is basically a yes or no question, basically, so it's just a yes or no question. Do you or do you not support reparation specifically, not for Latinos, not for indigenous people, not for Asians, specifically for Black Americans?
I think it's probably my turn to go first, huh?
Yes.
Can I give you a sentence? One sentence answer?
I would prefer yes or no, but if you feel like you do it in a sentence, make it short.
Okay. Reparations of some sort, absolutely. It might not just be a check, but we owe Black Americans a lot, and we need to find a way to make it up to them.
Thank you. And that wasn't too bad. I thought you were going to go in a long paragraph. Frankie?
It's not a yes or no question. I don't believe in cash reparations. I believe that we need to repair for sure, but cash reparations is not the logical way. And some of the studies that you're referring to, I believe if you do the math and you calculate how many beneficiaries are going to come from that, It's about $15 trillion. So imagine adding $15 trillion for each family to get, I think it's 1.2 or $1.5 million a piece. It's not feasible. I'd rather fix the actual structural disadvantages that happen. Make them have access to better business loans, better home ownership, and do systematic fixes. One in which that would improve all of the people that we owe reparations to, not just the Black community.
Understand, but again, I would say, okay, now Dave, you have a point. Go ahead, sir, please.
Yeah, a follow-up. Again, Frankie, I think you had a lot of good to say there. I think, oh shoot, I lost my train of thought. I can't believe I lost my train of thought. Yeah, I've lost it.
Cash reparations.
It'll come back to me.
And again, this is what both parties, and I'm talking about the major two. One party completely ignores Black people, and the other party just takes Black people for granted. So as a Black American, I'm going to always, not that I don't advocate for any other community, that's not the case. But when I look in the mirror and I see this face, it's good. That's why I phrased my question in that way, because we've talked about reparations for the Latin community at length. We've definitely talked about it for indigenous people, who I also think deserve it. But when it comes to Blacks, and this is why I ask it, it's when it comes to Blacks, all of a sudden now we just have this great big problem, and it's like, well, you didn't have a problem with Japanese Americans, which they should have definitely gotten theirs. You didn't have problems with indigenous, they should have gotten theirs. But when it comes to Black people, I think what's enraging a lot of us reparations activists, because I consider myself to be one, is like when it comes to Black people, the discussion of how we're going to pay for it, how we're going to do, all these how come questions have, but you weren't asking it when you were talking about everybody else. And that's a very frustrating kind of thing to get through.
I remembered what it was I wanted to say. Frankie kind of, I think, brought up the fact that it could be impractical to do cash reparations. It would be challenging, that's for sure. And I worry about that, and that's why I said it may not be a check. But we owe Black Americans a lot, and whatever we do to try to make up for the disadvantages that we have perpetrated, it will not be fair.
No, and we can't even get enough. Yeah, I don't even think, has this country ever officially apologized for slavery? I don't think so. We can't even get an apology. Like, you know what, we were wrong. I mean, it's like you had to fight for just this little itty bitty thing, and it's like, we'll start there, and then let's go here. And I'm not against making loans feasible for Black Americans, because we don't get loans. Mm-hmm. I've been sitting on a business idea for months, and pretty much if I walked into a bank, even with my credit score, I'm not getting it, and I know why I'm not getting it. So I agree with you, Frankie, that yes, you need to make home ownership feasible, you need to make banking feasible. Absolutely agree with that. Where I'm going to differ with you is, I'm like, you got to put something on paper so I can go do those things. But that's okay. It's okay for us to have different opinions. That's not what this program is about. And yes, you have one more question.
Well, it's just a tag on that too, because it's like I want to help all the communities. Is what it is, and it's interesting because right now, even Latinos, there's a lot of that community that don't embrace their Blackness and the Black portion of their culture. As soon as you start offering any kind of reparations, watch how quick they turn their tune. Hey, I'm Black too. What you gonna do for me? So it's also that tracking of any kind of lineage and trying to move forward.
You got to make a lineage base. You have to make it lineage based, because that would mean that people that come from Africa could, no, you're not. No, you were not the descendant of a slave. You just can't hear. No, it has to be lineage based. It has to be.
But that's the thing is, I can argue that if you're going to argue about the slave trade coming in, Puerto Rico is part of the United States, which means that any of the Africans that never actually potentially worked on plantations here, but stayed in Puerto Rico and integrated, that's lineage based. So then where do you draw the line as far as how far to go, who's proving all of that? It's going to be so, I'd rather just make systematic plans that are going to benefit everyone that looks like that. Because even we're divided in the black community. My whole life, anybody who was dark skinned was quote unquote African American. That's how they were classified. They put in Kamala Harris as the VP, and now all of a sudden they're like, oh, no, 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 she's Jamaican. She's not African American. And I'm like, now there's differences and different levels. Come on.
Yeah, and like I said, I asked that question because again, I find that the issues that black not that I do not speak for black people. Nobody get on this podcast or in the comments. I'm not a spokesman for the black. We're not a monolith. We all have different opinions. But since I'm here and since I'm black, our issues in terms of economics, in terms of fair lending, in terms of food deserts, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, it's like, okay, they'll just vote Democrat. No, not necessarily. And so and that's why I bring those issues to light, because it's a struggle, especially since we are the least likely to get loans. We experience housing discrimination at tremendous rates, and other races do too. Problem is, I'm not those other races. I'm a black American. That's what I am. That's what I look at. That's what I see. So I didn't want to make it seem like I was excluding other communities, but because I am who I am, I have to bring it. Always have to. I'm always black focused. That's who I am. But that doesn't mean I'm ignoring the indigenous community. I'm not ignoring the Asian community. I'm not ignoring, and I know Latinx is not a good term to use, but the Latino community, I'm not ignoring them. But again, because I am who I am, I'm going to put forth that black agenda. So the next issue, and I hope you guys understand that. So it's just like, I didn't want to come across as, well, I'm just going to be here and talk about that for an hour because I could, but I'm not. The next issue I want to talk about is something else that I don't think is talked about a lot. I think Dave and I got across from this, and Frankie, I'll let you answer it first. It's food deserts. Those that live in very rural communities and those that live in metropolitan areas, the lack of affordable, nutritious, environmentally friendly, I don't know if that's a term. If it's not, it's going to be. There are very few grocery stores. I think I was telling Dave that I have to drive 12 minutes from my home to get to pick up my medicine and groceries. There's no place that I could get out of my house and walk to pick up groceries. And that happens in a lot of poor communities in this country. What, again, I'm asking for specific actions that you would take to address the food desert problem. And I'm going to let Frankie go first, and we're back to 3 minutes.
So I'm actually working on a bill now with someone who brought it up to the attention in Chicago when I was there campaigning. And so what we're going to focus on is really, really changing the narrative and the discussion around even healthy foods or options within the schools to make sure the kids are at least getting that beneficial nutrition. But what it comes down to is really, really supply and demand. We're still importing a whole bunch of our nutritional foods. And so since we're trying to keep up with that demand, that's where we're cutting corners. We're using certain pesticides. We're using a lot of GMOs. Whereas if my plan, what it does is it focuses on the farming aspect and the need for agricultural advancements. What my immigration plan does is it expands the number of visas for those people who want to come here and legitimately work. Not the ones that are coming for asylum, but the ones that people love to complain about. Give them that opportunity to do so. Give them a visa where they can come here, they can work in specifically allocated to the agricultural field so that the farmers get the benefits, and we can expand that and start working on our exports. and fulfilling the needs of the Americans here so that it cuts down our costs. Because if we make it here, it has to come from lesser borders and barriers, which means that cost is going to be driven significantly lower. And since we can make it profitable with all the excess in exporting instead of the vice versa of us importing, that helps our economy and boost the amount of money that we can actually now allocate to those nutritional values and keeping costs low. What it really comes is we have the resources here, we just don't have the labor force to make that happen. And New York, I would say too, it's everything super overpriced. So whenever I go and travel some other places, everything's cheap to me in that sense. But it is based on your cost of living. Groceries are a huge burden and cost, which is why our economy is failing, because people are now not spending on luxuries. Instead, they're spending on necessities and basically on survival.
Okay, you have 50 seconds to spare. We're going to go to the comments because I'm not going to ask you to respond to them, but I did promise I would get to them. Let's start with this one.
Wait, am I not going to get to do the...
Oh, you're going to get to do your response. I just want to get these comments and then you get
Gotcha.
your response. Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for reminding me. The best weapon one can use is information. What do Russian school children learn about the West and Ukraine? Most likely they learn whatever Putin wants them to learn, which leads to hatred. America should intervene to spread. Well, no, we're not going to read that one. Russia hates Ukraine because that's what they were learned to do. Frankie makes a great point about the prices of medication. The price of insulin in America is $98.70 a vial. In Europe, say France, is $9.08 a vial. Now, why is the same vial 10 times the price in America than in France? Great point. These numbers are from 2018. Food prices have been skyrocketing. Mommy Wayne, thank you. Welcome. So we did not discuss trans rights because I said we were going to focus on the economy. But because everyone should have rights. I mean, I think that goes without saying. But thank you for bringing that to attention. Ways to encourage farming. Trans rights hasn't been mentioned. I understand because I said we were going to basically keep this on the economy. And maybe reorganize farmers and make them work more planet friendly. Okay, so now, Dave, you may respond.
Thanks. Maybe I need to say this for some people who may not have figured it out, but my main thrust is to try to make sure that we don't leave our kids a dead planet, because there's no food on the table on a dead planet. Of course, there's no affordable housing on a dead planet. There's no roof over your head on a dead planet. There's no peace on a dead planet. So I will never embrace a solution to any of these problems that keeps us on or takes us down a pathway to a dead planet. We've got to find solutions to these issues that are in harmony with the ability of the planet to meet our needs. And food's going to be a big one because the climate crisis is one of our most urgent environmental issues, and it's an existential issue. And it could be that alone could leave our kids with a dead planet if we can't come to terms with that. And so we've got to eliminate food miles. Globalization really has not been our friend. Globalization has really helped us screw things up because it has increased the food miles. We're burning way too many fossil fuels, spending way too much energy moving food around. It allows us to hide our mistakes, and it allows us to export our waste and our dirty habits and desires and consumption, rather than having it close to home where we can face it. And so, my vision for the United States going forward is going to be the opposite of globalization, being a good global citizen, but otherwise really working on meeting our needs here within this country, not focusing on exporting much, if anything, but also trying not to import any more food than we need. We've got 8 billion people on the planet, baby, and it's probably going to continue to go higher for a time. There aren't any places on the planet with a lot of food where they're waving their hands and saying, "Can we ship you our food?" We do not want to be competing in this world for a diminishing supply of food. We've got to be able to figure out how to meet our food needs here in the United States and very close to home. And so instead of finding ways to, and also because we're trying to eliminate carbon emissions, we don't want Tracy to have to drive and burn fossil fuels to go get food. We've got to make sure that there are food sources close to her. A lot of people in the new 21st century economy, I envision, will be moving out to the farms and being in rural communities again, and they will be closer to food. A lot more people will be growing their own food. They'll have more time to grow their own food, but we'll make sure that there are supermarkets and food clubs and farmers markets in the neighborhoods that don't have close access to food.
We're still staying with the economy because there's another issue. And I said this right off the top, we're going to be concentrating the economy because I believe that most Americans, it's something I learned when I started getting into politics, is the economy stupid. That's what most people care about. They care about how much they're getting in their pockets. And here is the next issue. But this time, because of time, I'm going to make it 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Minimum wage. Minimum wage has been $7.25 for at least 10 years. There was a push by President Biden, although I call it a half-hearted push because I don't think he wanted it in the first place, to raise minimum wage to $15. And I want Alyssa to this specific question because I'm looking for a specific number. If you were president of the United States, what would you make the minimum wage? And the second question is, how can we encourage businesses that say, oh, I don't have enough to pay my workers that? What would you do to help them? So it's a two-part question. I need a number, what you think the minimum wage should be, like a specific number, and what would you do to help businesses that are maybe the mom and pop shops? Because we know the corporations can reach them. They have literally no excuse. They can reach those numbers. But what would you say, or what would you do to help like the mom and pop shops get to that? Dave, I think you went first last time, or was it Frankie that went first last time? Okay, so Dave, I'll let you go first, and it's 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, I don't know the exact number because I haven't studied it thoroughly, but I think the minimum wage needs to be somewhere, my guess would be in the $20 to $25 an hour range is where the minimum wage really needs to be. Now, it's really tricky, this issue about these businesses that think paying the minimum wage is going to put them out of business. We do not want to solve that problem by finding ways to perpetuate what's really the issue. I mean, if there's no way that a business can meet our needs without mistreating employees and paying them $7.50 an hour, then we need to be willing to pay more for whatever that is, for whatever that service is. And, in some cases, that's going to be food. We will probably find ourselves paying more for the food that we pay for under my administration because we are not going to take advantage of an underground labor market. We're not going to underpay migrant labor, pay them a pittance, way less than they deserve to be paid, just so we can have cheap food. Now, we want to be able to afford to have food on the table, right? But we do not want to solve that problem by creating this other problem of mistreating people and paying them so poorly that they have lousy living conditions. That's my 1 minute.
Keep going. Yeah. You got 50 seconds.
Okay. So that's going to be challenging, but we're going to be turning the economy upside down in my administration because we're going to be figuring out a way to do this without growing the economy, without consuming more. We're going to be finding ways to live better with less, to work less, to earn less, and spend less. So it'd take more than 30 seconds or even 2.5 minutes to explain that, but I hope I get a chance to talk more about that.
Okay. Frankie, you may respond.
So I don't have a definitive number. I do know it's got to be at least 15. I'm not opposed to raising to 20 plus for major corporations with a certain X amount of employees. Not opposed to that. The issue I have is mandating a lot of these minimums to small business owners because fair market value changes depending on the industry, the type of work, and the type of product you have. So it would cause a burden onto the small business owners. However, going back to my universal basic income, now everybody's going to be guaranteed, especially the working age ones, $12,000 a year as that cushion and pillow. So that's going to alleviate the need for raising up on those mom and pops. Now, incorporating of my guaranteed healthcare, generational health, that now small mom and pops and businesses do not have to pay for their employees' healthcare. So that's another alleviated cost that now they can redistribute and pay their employees more naturally. So instead of mandating it, just create those programs that are going to alleviate that stress and create the opportunities for us to build up our own wealth ladder. Because even with raising the minimum wage in New York, right now I think it's 12 or 15 in New York. And what's happening is great. It's helping some people, but it's still not enough. So if you're not supplementing with any other way, it doesn't matter how high you raise it. If you want to live in New York, it's going to have to give you a number of 30, 35 an hour at a minimum. It's ridiculous, the cost of living. So unless we do those supplements there, I don't necessarily think that raising up the actual number is going to make a big, big difference if we do not have the supplemental universal basic income.
Thank you very much. We're going to go back to 3 minutes, and we're still going to stay on the economy because there is another crisis in America. But wait a minute. Dave actually has a question that's directed toward him, and I'm going to give him 2 minutes to answer this question because it's directed for him. So I'll give him 2 minutes to answer this. It says, question for Dave. You mentioned that people should not drive to get food. I have been to America this summer in Pennsylvania, and my impression was that a car was a necessity. America is built that way. You need a car to get around. How would you solve the need for a car?
Thanks. That's a great question. We're not going to solve the climate crisis if we keep driving cars, even if they're electric cars. It just makes zero sense to be putting the energy into moving several tons of metal in order to transport 175-pound human being. That's just insane. And so in my administration, when under my national project to get out of ecological overshoot, we're going to put a lot of energy into mental energy, let's say, into putting the nation on an energy diet. We've got to find ways to do everything with less expenditure of energy, and that includes getting to work, getting to recreation, getting your food on the table. So we will first of all we will have carbon pricing so that we have signals that will help remind us to make decisions that don't put us in situations where we need to drive a vehicle long distances. Over time, that will help us to change this suburbanization that we've got going on, where people live way too far away from where they work, live way too far away from where they have community. Two, we will put energy into active transportation. We will make it easier and more affordable to walk, to ride a bicycle, to take public transportation. Those will be the main means of moving people around. We've got to get people out of their cars, and so the carbon pricing signals will help us do that. But we've got to turn everything upside down so that the United States starts to look a whole lot more like Holland with people on their bicycles.
I have a follow up question. Well, I'll ask you that privately because what I will know, I'm like, well, what happens when it snows? Because who wants to be? Because I live in a place, it snows in Indiana. I mean, it's like we're shoveling. It was a mild winter this year. That's probably due to climate change, but usually there's some snow somewhere. I'm like, do I really want to be standing outside? Because our transportation in Indianapolis is terrible, 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 terrible.
I have a great answer for you when you're ready for that.
Go ahead, please.
Well, I know a gentleman who doesn't have a car, who rides a bicycle and rides the bus in Minneapolis, St. Paul. In the middle of winter. I have just been blown away to see him walk into a meeting, and he does it because he cares that much about leaving his kids a bright future. So he dresses warmly. But I know that's not necessarily for everyone. So we're not going to be doing this, Tracy, with the world that you're talking about in Indianapolis. We're going to be, instead of wasting a lot of money on the fossil fuels that today's military is burning, we're going to be investing those resources into beefing up the public transportation sector in places like Indianapolis, so that it's so that you don't die or freeze in the cold riding the bus or the train or whatever other public transportation you might choose to use.
Last question. And this is, I may allow 4 minutes for this one. Yeah, I'll allow 4 minutes for this one. I said 3 at the beginning, but I've been changing it. See, that's a woman's. No, I'm not going to do that. It's like, it's a woman's prerogative. I can change my mind when I want to. But don't look at me like that. Like, stop looking at me like that. But I want to talk about if you get elected to be president of the United States, what 3 things will you do within the first 100 days? What 3 things will you do within the first 100 days? And I think Frankie is up, but he may be busy. Are you good to go?
I can.
Okay, you have 4 minutes.
4 minutes. My goodness, it's a lot of time. First and foremost, like I said, is to immediately remove the barriers from medications across the country, across the globe, allowing Americans to have access to be able to import their same tested quality medications from other nations. Number 1. Number 2 is to federally decriminalize all of marijuana. That, I think, would be the biggest boost to our economy, releasing a whole bunch of folks who should not be in any kind of prison systems for a drug that is now a lucrative endeavor for the majority of Americans in this country. And then the other one would be to, like I said, I mean, I'm impartial, but one of the things I would do is fix the Jones Act, which the Jones Act impartially impacts territories within the American government. I don't know how you want to word it, but the Jones Act is something that I'm very passionate about changing. It puts a lot of barriers and restrictions on the livelihood of our Americans that live within our territories. So those are the big 3 things for sure. And then just fighting for our healthcare program, because we need it. Healthcare is something that should be a guaranteed right. And that's just within 100 days. So we got time.
You have actually 2 minutes and 36 seconds left if you want to continue.
I can continue for sure. Like I said, I want to do an education push on for nuclear energy. We are so behind the ball. We're using it. We're in that negative rhetoric that it's such a bad concept. It's a bad thing. But my logic is, if it's such a powerful thing to use for evil, it should be such a powerful thing that we can use for good. And we're behind the ball, and countries like France are just dominating the industry. I think they're powering like 25% of their country off of nuclear energy. That's another big push that we're going through. Plus, that's the only way we're going to be able to live through our demand for electricity. The next thing is education too, fighting for our universal basic income, but also my plan is to put a federal base expectancy on education. That way we can kind of override the states a little bit. You guys can still have control over what you want. But at a bare minimum, I want financial literacy in our schools. I want trades reinserted back into schools. And I want people to have the opportunity and understand the concept of debt, and so they won't be predatory targets.
Okay, so you did that with 128 to go. David is, I said David. Dave, it is now your turn. I
Is
apologize.
is it 4 minutes
Four
or three?
minutes.
4 minutes. Okay, thanks. Okay, I want to show you a chart. One of the things, everything I'm going to do, with one exception, in my first 100 days of presidency, is in recognition of this fact that our pursuit of growth is leaving our kids a dead planet. 3% annual economic growth is considered pretty good. It's a good measure. People think if GDP growth falls below 3%, then you may not get reelected, or the economy may be inching toward recession. Well, let me show you what happens if we have 3% annual economic growth over time. Did this little chart. Now, we won't all be here in 720 years, but that's not that long, and the economy would be 1 billion times the size it is today if we have 3% annual economic growth. We can't do that. We can't even double the size of our economy today and expect our kids to have a bright future. We can't even have an economy the size it is today. We need to contract our economy because we got carried away. We blew it. We have overshot. So we are in ecological overshoot, and that's why all of the news, big picture-wise, is not good when you look at our report card. We're pushing other species off the planet at record rates. We have mental health issues. We have affordable housing crises. We have fertile soil depletion, freshwater crises. About half the people on the planet are expected to be living with freshwater shortages. And I know I've forgotten one. The climate crisis. We're baking the planet. All of those things are because there are too many of us over-consuming. We've just gotten carried away. So, first 100 days of my administration, number one, I will declare an emergency, an ecological overshoot emergency. Number two, I will launch the national project to get the U.S. out of ecological overshoot. And of course, it's not just the U.S. that's involved in this. It is the whole world. But we will lead the world. And when the U.S. does things well, the world sometimes follows. Then the one thing that isn't related to that I would do in my first 100 days is I would begin work with, I think I'd have to work with Congress on this, because we would need to change some laws and change the Constitution such that we will never, ever have to worry about whether a president of the United States could pardon himself or instruct the Department of Justice to drop charges against him. That should be impossible in the United States. And apparently it's not impossible, because there's a lot of conjecture that would happen if Donald Trump wins this 2024 election. So when I win this election, I'm going to make darn sure that no matter who it is, no man or woman is above the law. I have 1 more minute, I think.
44 seconds.
Yeah. Let me show you one more chart. I've got these visual aids that I almost never use, just to help you understand how we've gotten carried away and why we need to really focus on contracting our economy, contracting our population, getting back in balance with Mother Nature. Just look at what we have done over the last 100 years. We used to be about 25%, us and our livestock used to be about 25% of the mammalian biomass on the planet. And now, we've eliminated over 70% of nature. The world doesn't work that way, so we've got to change our ways.
I want to thank both of our participants for taking part in this second to last debate. I've had a great time. I've actually learned some things, which I always do, but especially this one. We're going to hit this last comment. I'm not going to ask anybody to read it or comment on it, but I'm just making sure I get to all the comments. America is a big country, and making it just like Holland would be an impossibility. I'm not talking about densely populated areas, but the rural areas. Most bus and railways would help, I believe. The most railway in America is now cargo. I believe the train is slow. It is time to look at what Japan is doing to their with their transportation system, because anything would be better than Indianapolis, Indiana. Um, so I am going to let each of you talk, give you a minute or so to talk about where people can connect to you on social media. If you're taking donations for your campaign, how can they donate? And Frankie, you go.
Donations to be made through my Act Blue since I am running on the Democratic line. So the website is Lozada 2024, LOZADA 2024.com. There is also my old website that never transferred over, which is Frankie, FRANKIE, number 4, us.com. Definitely check out the page. Like I said, we are still on a journey. The DNC is in August in Illinois, so we'll be planning there too. I'm also planning to do a thank you tour for all of these states and folks where I got a good portion of votes in during the primaries. So on that list, I will be seeing soon Utah, Colorado, Texas, Minnesota, um, Louisiana, and Arizona. So see you all soon there. Frankie for us and Lozada2024.com.
And Dave.
Real quick nod to Frankie. Frankie, very sharp, good answers, very impressive. So I have a lot of respect for you. So thank you for
you as
putting
well,
your hat in
Dave.
the ring.
I think we both did good.
So Dave the Planet, not Save the Planet, but Dave the Planet 2024.com is the website to go to. You can find a way to reach out to me. You can find a way to donate. We could use some financial support to help us do some YouTube advertising. Dave the Planet 2024 YouTube channel. We've tried to put out some good educational material. And I will be speaking at EarthX in Dallas, Texas. This is really about the only campaign trip I'm making because I'm really trying to keep my carbon footprint down. But the week of April 22nd, I will be at EarthX in Dallas. And I'm hoping maybe someone in Dallas will organize a house party for me to speak at, but I'll also be on a panel at EarthX and on the EarthX TV stage. So watch for that.
And remember, everybody, subscribe to this page. Subscribe to this page. Subscribe to this page. I'm at 220, which means I'm 80 away from 300. That's my next goal. Remember to support us on Patreon. And normally I don't make this appeal on this show, but I will go ahead. I have no interview scheduled for the month of April by any politician. I can't believe it's actually happened where I'm just at a 0 politician interview request. So if you are mostly a third party candidate and you are running for office, contact me at Tracy, TRACYMEDIA LLC@gmail.com. I would be glad to interview you. If I don't get interviews, that means I'm going to have to do silly topics. And as much as I enjoy doing those, I want to keep my Thursday programs focused on politics. But I will do what I have to do to keep myself going.
I got someone for you, so I'll send you their way.
Thank you. I appreciate you gentlemen taking time to speak to me. I realize I kind of went left on the reparations thing, but like I said, it means a lot to me.
Part of the economy.
But we will have one more probably sometime in the summer, probably in July. I'm not sure of the exact date, but I will see you all then. This video, even though it'll go live, I'm not going to put in, I will put in the contacts for Dave's website and Frankie's website probably tomorrow. No, I'll do that this evening. And they'll be up. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Thank you for joining us. See you next week. See you Saturday when I do my special podcast. Thank you and have a great evening.